welcome Michelle up on stage. She is here again. She was at Blockchain Africa last year and did a really fascinating and interesting presentation. And she's here again today and to talk about the impact of digital assets in terms of the Africa Free Trade Agreement and growth in Africa, and see how this can actually help the economy. So please welcome her up onto the stage.
Thanks. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. How is everybody this afternoon? Great to be back. Thanks so much. Yeah, no, last year was actually phenomenal. We had a great day yesterday, and I won't repeat too much what I've been doing because I think most of you were here yesterday. But today, very much want to, look a little bit deeper into what the opportunities are for sort of the digital economy and what we're calling digital assets in supporting the, the growth in Africa, but also in supporting the implementation of the Free Trade Area Agreement. Thank you. So yes, just to start off, I think certainly, when we're talking about the economy, I think what I would like to try and do before we actually dig into that is to put a bit of context behind what's going on currently globally. I think as most of us can witness, we are facing many challenges. We're facing many different sort of complications around the world. And some of the really core things that are happening, I think when you're looking at policies, for example, a lot of countries are very much looking at very nationalistic policies and, really dwelling into understanding what their economies are doing around policy. There is, of course, obvious trade wars that we've witnessed over some time now. Environmental challenges that everybody knows about, and we're struggling to actually get to grips with that. But also looking very closely to my heart is very much around unemployment, especially youth unemployment, which was touched on yesterday a little bit, but I think that's a really significant area, particularly for Africa. The demographic shifts, I think, again, when you're talking about Africa, very important area to consider and to cover and to really dwell into. But I think the magic one, or the magic kind of that's really sort of shining, doesn't matter what country or what place we're in, is around digitization. And I think digitization offers massive opportunities, actually, for the continent and for the rest of the world. So hence, yesterday we talked a little bit around the fourth industrial revolution and what's coming around that. So just to give that little bit of context as we go along the slides. Now, in terms of the continent itself, I've picked up, 4 really core areas. These are not the only issues. Definitely, there are a whole range of other challenges, I think, that we face as a continent. But I think, in particular, one of the things that we do really need to focus on is around unemployment and jobs, and very much around the leadership. When I'm talking about unemployment, I'm talking about new opportunities that we can actually create for our young people, for example, opportunities for SMEs, opportunities for women, as I touched on a little bit yesterday, but also around leadership. This is sort of a contentious area where there isn't that much kind of open conversations around leadership. What are we doing around leadership? Have we got the right leadership in place? We've heard many times about some of the leaders across the continent that are very supportive around the whole digitization agenda. But are all our leaders on the same page? Do we need to do a little bit more work around working with our leaders to understand what the opportunities are around digital? I think we certainly do in certain countries. Yes, some countries are a little bit more progressive, but I think there's avenues for us to engage a little bit better and think about the leadership mindset, which is, I think, very core in order for us to succeed with what I'm going to present today. Then, of course, access to financing. I think that's a really key one. Access to capital, access to financing for businesses, but more generically, even for governments. In order for us to actually implement the Free Trade Area Agreement, we do need a certain level of capital. We do need a certain level of financing in place. Have we got that right? Talent and skills I keep highlighting because I think it's pretty cool for the growth and development of Africa as a whole. Have we got the right skills in place? What do we need to do around skills and building the future skills? So, Free Trade Area Agreement. How many people have heard about the Free Trade Area Agreement in this room? I was hoping everybody would put their hands up. So yeah, no, the Free Trade Area Agreement is pretty significant, I think, for Africa. It's definitely a very transformational vision for the continent in terms of changing, opportunities and providing opportunities around trade, yes, but also in terms of growth and facilitating that growth for the continent as a whole. So, there are many opportunities, I think, or, advantages of the Free Trade Area Agreement, or the ambitions to have the advantages of Free Trade Area Agreement. This includes when you look at things like, the increase in interregional trade across different African countries, how we trade with our neighbors, how we engage with our neighbors, the free movement of goods, capital, people, very, very significant in today's world. Yes, other parts of the world, I think, are shifting the other way around, where everybody starting to look at very nationalistic sort of areas, whereas I think in Africa, we're very much ambitious about creating probably the largest single market of the world, post the World Trade Organization. So what does that actually mean? I think that means driving growth. Yeah, really opening up inclusive growth, which I talked about a little bit yesterday. Being able to create opportunities around education, around trade, around business, around manufacturing, around healthcare, things that really matter, things that really transform economies. So how do we go about doing that? Very, very important, I think, if we tap into the free trade area agreement and make that work. The other thing that we really focus on, I think, is around opening up new markets and opening up access to new markets. Certainly, I think with the free trade area agreement or with digitalization as a whole, you're starting to create opportunities to access markets that maybe a lot of SMEs or entrepreneurs or young people haven't really had access to up until now. And certainly, I think the underlying goal or factor is really driving that economic diversification, which I think a lot of African economies are doing, are starting to explore, and need to do in order for growth to happen. So yes, but challenges do exist. It's not going to be easy, I think, in terms of implementing the free trade area agreement. There's going to be a lot of work. It takes a lot of collaboration and a lot of effort. There's complexity around trading as a whole. We talk about trade today. There's so many players within the trading ecosystem. How do we deal with the complexity? How do we look at creating value chains, what we call value chains that are actually enabling us to create wealth, enabling us to create opportunity? Now, we can't do that if we have, supply chains which have countless, hurdles as you go across when you're trying to trade and do business with your neighbor. Where you're not able to, you have so many documentation that you have to deal with before you can shift a product or good or service, or you have, legal barriers or laws that are in place that do not support your trade and your business. So we need to look at that a little bit closer. How do we start to involve everybody into the digital trade? Digital trade is very, very important. I think as we move forward with e-commerce and a whole range of different activities, how do we onboard everybody? How do we ensure everybody understands or can interact with the digital tools that we do have and they're able to trade? Because I think that is the future. But how do we ensure that everybody's on board? And of course, there's fragmentation across the continent. Our countries have different levels of development. We all have different stages of development. I think we heard this morning from South Africa and what South Africa has been doing, but not all countries are at the same level playing field. How do we deal with that? How do we ensure that we can get everybody sort of on equal level playing field, right? And provide tools that are actually fit for that particular market. At the same time, how do we deal with bureaucracy? How do we move away from bureaucracy? How do we look at implementation? The key words, I think, with the free trade area agreement to make it work is implementation. How do we ensure that we can actually implement what we're planning? How do we ensure that we work in collaboration to do that? And how do we standardize as well? Very, very core and very important. But yes, so this is what I think some of the solutions are. This is an opportunity, I think, for the continent to really take a leading role in terms of really leveraging the digital economy, what we're referring to as the digital economy. And within the digital economy, you have various digital tools. You've heard a lot about blockchain. That's one of the tools that I refer to, but there's so many other tools. There's so many opportunities within the digital economy that allows you or equips you as a country, as a continent, to start really driving change and transformational change for the people as well. So very, very important. And one of the areas I do want to emphasize is around sort of digital assets as well. Digital assets is kind of a new buzzword that's kind of surfacing, but what does that actually mean? What does that mean for Africa? How do we leverage that in order to grow what we're trying to do? So, again, to just contextualize a little bit in terms of how important I think digitization as a whole is globally around the world. You can see from here, mobile phone users, for example, over 5 billion mobile phone users across the world. When you're looking at internet users, for example, millions of people, billions of people using the internet. And then social media users, growing by the day. How engaged are we with social media? How engaged are we in terms of promoting what we're trying to, educate our young people, our older people, everybody? How are they engaging in social media? Do they know how to engage with social media? Social media itself can create jobs and opportunities. Are we leveraging social media enough? Good question to have. So for me, I think one of the core things, definitely, is looking at how the fourth industrial revolution, and of course emerging technology, which we've all heard about, is driving Africa forward. And today, for the first time, I have created this hashtag, because this hashtag kind of says a lot, So the digital economy, as well as the digital assets, that we're going to create, are an opportunity to actually drive that growth. And the engine to deliver some of these is through the Free Trade Area Agreement. Pretty powerful, And that's through the engine, then you're creating transformation. Then you're creating growth. Then you're enabling growth. Totally, totally important, I think, for the continent and for the people within the continent. So how do we go about doing that? I think for an effective digital economy to work, you can't do it without some of these. Connectivity, infrastructure, it is key. If you cannot have connectivity, if you do not have people who have access and opportunity to interact, even within the digital economy, it makes it very, very difficult, right? The access to new markets, by being digital, by being creative, by being innovative, you're creating opportunity to access new markets. And by accessing new markets, you're creating opportunity to earn, to create value, to untap value, to retain value. Very, very important. And then converged innovations. So we've heard a lot about individual technologies, blockchain, AI, machine learning, IoT, all kind of dotted about here and there. I think the power is very much in the converged technologies working in power to deliver what it is that you want to deliver. If we cannot get to the level where we cannot, sort of interoperability you heard about earlier on, very, very key. How do we ensure some of these systems are interoperable with other back-end, systems in order to deliver what we're trying to do? How do we look at business model transformation? So you as company owners in this room, have you evaluated your current business model and what that looks like in 5, 10 years' time with the context of digitization, with the context of things like digital assets? Does that matter for you? Do you understand it? Do you want to understand it? Very, very important. And then in terms of value creation, I've talked about, it's all about value creation. How do you untap value? What is value to you? A lot of people have different meanings for value. I like my cars, I like my hair, I like my makeup, I like my shoes. That's all value. It's not just monetary value. What does it actually mean for you as a business, for example, as a government, as a country, as a continent? Very important to understand. And then SC is supply chain, end-to-end digitization. So we're not looking at the supply chain. It's okay, we're going to digitize this a little bit here, and then forget about the rest. We're going to make sure we have documentation digitized, forget about the other. You're missing the trick, because we're going to go back again. You have to have end-to-end solutions, in order to enable you to actually effectively use it. So, driving Africa forward. I think definitely when you look at all these different technologies, be it Internet of Things, big data, drones, blockchain, by kind of working with these technologies as tools, as enablers, it's pretty powerful and pretty transformational. Some of these figures, maybe you might not be able to see at the back, but you certainly have the slide later on, and you'll see the predictions in terms of the growth that will happen from each one of these technologies in the future. So how do we work with this? In fact, a lot of African countries are actually doing this already, working with drones and a whole range of other areas. And you'll see as we scroll across the PowerPoint. But how do we do it? Through digitization. How do we look at digitization properly? How do we actually understand it? And I think one of the main things to really focus on is around increasing financial services. When I'm talking about financial services, you're giving choice, you're giving an amalgamation of different financial services, rather than we just have the banks. The banks are absolutely relevant, yes, but we have to have other offers. We have to have other opportunities, crowdfunding, a whole range of other sources for business to untap, for entrepreneurs to untap. So you're going to see a lot more growth in terms of different financial packages coming through. Now, how many of those packages are being driven by Africans? How many of them are being created by Africans? Do we understand how to go and create those new packages, those new models of financing? How do we value, and untap financing from blockchain-based financing, for example? How does AI help us to understand and read some of the data that's coming from some of the information that's collected? Very, very key. And fintech, of course, is very, very important. Are we focusing around fintech? Are we growing the fintech ecosystem across the continent? I think very, very important to look at how are we doing that? How can we do that? What does it mean for us? Does it contribute to the Free Trade Area Agreement and the growth of that? So, now, digital assets and tokenization. I'm sure many of you have heard the terminologies and they've been sprung about here and there. When you look at that map, we've had this for decades and decades. In Africa, we've had natural resources, we've had commodities, We are a rich, rich continent, totally rich continent. But have we untapped that value from all that? How many people think we have? Genuinely. Have we untapped the value? Are we going to untap the value? What does it mean for each of these countries? Even if you look at them individually, what does it mean? What are we doing to untap the value? How are we creating wealth that is retained within the continent? And I strongly think, yes, one way of doing it is through digital assets. By digitizing some of these commodities, by digitizing a whole range of other, sort of physical goods, you can retain wealth. You can create new wealth. You can create new capital. Yeah, you can save the capital. You can use it for all sorts of different things. And then you're starting to create wealth which can be retained within the economies. Very, very important. But we need to understand it. What does tokenization mean? We've heard a lot around blockchain as a concept. Yeah, but have we looked into tokenomics? So the art of what does it mean? What does tokenomics, what does these tokens mean? How can we use tokens to actually mean something, to create value? Because with tokens, there's that sense of, oh, this is valuable. I'm going to buy the tokens because I think it is valuable. But when you start attaching some of these assets to real assets like gold, how many people in this room want to have gold? How many people? Who wants gold? So what are we doing about it? What are you doing about it? If you went today, and can you go easily to go and find gold today? Do you know how transparent the whole gold market is? Do you know who the main players are? Do you know the brokers? Very, very difficult to understand today. And I think with a lot of this, it's going to transform, it's going to change a lot of things. And part of the enablers is definitely, obviously, technology. And blockchain is part of that. So some of the solutions. I'm going to run through the next slides very, very quickly. Sort of blockchain, looking at identity, you've heard about this, payments, healthcare, transportation, very, very key. When you're looking at emerging technology around energy usage, the decentralization of energy, access to electricity, a lot of countries still don't have access to electricity. Or it's cut off every now and then. I've heard about load shedding. I heard about it. Yeah? So how do we deal with that? How do we sort that out? Blockchain for sustainable, inclusive cities, very, very important. As we look at urbanization and the growth in terms of urban cities, people moving to cities, how do we deal with that? How can we leverage blockchain to do that? Yeah? How can we use smart contracts? How can we look at things like sustainable finance? What is green financing? Impact financing? A lot of that has to be discussed and looked at, for sure. So this is actually a new infographic that we created at my company, which hasn't been shared at all. We used this with the UN recently, and it captures quite a lot. It's something that you need to take time to actually look at in a little bit more detail. Use cases. 442 tech hubs today across Africa. An increase in terms of growth of funding going towards tech innovations in Africa. Pretty powerful. Who are they, though? Do we know who these tech companies are? Do we know who are the unicorns that are being created from these tech hubs? Where are they? Do we hear from them? Not really. They should be here. They should be speaking here. What's the potential for them? How are we helping them? How are we helping them grow and supporting them? Very, very important. They're going to contribute to the growth that I talked about, the inclusive growth. They're going to contribute to the free trade area agreement. They're going to open up new markets. They're going to be key players. So we need to engage them a little bit more, I think. And a whole range of use cases across the continent. 3D printing in South Africa. Drones in Rwanda used for medical supplies. Kenya, of course, we know M-Pesa and payments, huge. Uganda, all sorts of innovation going there. Nigeria, crowdfunding, a whole range of things going on. Ghana, help with farmers using technology and mobile-based apps and a whole range of other things. So we do have a lot going on in the continent, but we do need to capture that. What does it all mean, to summarize? What does it all mean to summarize? What do we need to succeed? I think in order for us to succeed and really leverage the digital economy, we need to look at infrastructure. We need those platforms. The digital platforms, how do we use them? Do we understand them? How do we leverage them? Education, so key. I think we don't even need to keep saying it. Yesterday we heard about it, today we heard about it. Without education, I think a lot of this stuff just doesn't mean anything. And we cannot deliver on a lot of it. So education is very important. Sometimes we put it on the side a little bit, but I think it's core, it's critical, especially for the continent. We need to educate. E-commerce is huge. Investment, I've talked about. Financing, very, very important. Quality data, you've heard about data. Yes, data is important. Yes, data can be the new oil, but the right data. Yeah, quality data, not just any data. Very, very important. And of course, convergence. When I talked about convergence, I was talking about the usage of different technology. You're going to see a lot more convergence happening, especially when you look at all the different technologies I've highlighted over there. And so this is more kind of my call out to governments and others who are more kind of regulators. What are the policy recommendations look like? This is just a few. You know, I could write a whole paper on policy recommendations around digital transformation and how they can leverage digital economy in countries. How you can evaluate and say, actually, are central bank digital currencies, for example, actually relevant for my country? Not because everybody else is doing it. Oh, it sounds really sexy today. I also want to be heard and seen to be, oh, I'm looking at central bank digital currencies. But what does it mean? Do you actually need to look at central bank digital currencies? What does it actually mean? Right? Very, very important. Fixing the skills gap, education gap, I've talked about. Developing that physical and digital infrastructure is absolutely core and necessary in order to grow and diversify. Cybersecurity, we don't hear a lot about. How do you protect yourself? And cyber is one of the biggest issues. These technologies are there to help. You know, manage cyber crime, cybersecurity, data, very, very important, I think, for the continent. And then we want to look at decentralized systems, which I've already talked about. And back to my hashtag that I've created. Digital assets, right? Digital economy. How do we actually leverage that for Africa, right? And for me, this is a pretty powerful slide, probably one of the most powerful in the context of Africa. We have young people who all have this. We have women traders who all have that, if not two, right? We've got business people who all have access to that. How are we using that? What are the apps and decentralized apps that are on this thing that we can use to help us? You don't need to understand that it's blockchain-based or, you know, it's IoT or you don't need to really understand that. But how do we create apps that actually help us to do what we need to do best? And back to my point, to untap value, right? And create our own value, very important. And to just finalize, for us as a company, we're big on education. You know, we've introduced a whole range of different programs for different categories of people, executives, governments, central banks, to really understand this space, not just blockchain. It's about the digital transformation, the digital economy, digital assets. How do you create and build that? How do you leverage them? How do you, create opportunity for your countries, for your nations, for the continent, for your people in your businesses, for your families and friends? How do we leverage the opportunities that are there today? We have to understand. We have to learn. Yeah, we have to educate. So we have different categories. Blockchain for women, again, we're very passionate about. At the African Union, we looked at blockchain for youth. What does that mean? How do we equip our youth? A lot of the people you see in that picture are running their own businesses, and they're using technology. AI, some of them are combining AI, IoT, and blockchain. In Africa, these are all young people, young business owners, all doing this today, but with very little capital, very little support. How do we support them a bit more? Very, very important. And blockchain for women, of course. So, just a big thank you for myself. Really appreciate you inviting me back here. I have a very small, very lean, but pretty vicious team, and this is my team, and I did promise that I would highlight a lot of the work they're doing, because they are contributing a lot. And each one of these people are located in different parts of the world, because we are covering different parts of the world. And hence why I'm talking about education and collaboration is important. We need to know what's happening in other markets in order for us to inform us what we should do around free trade area agreement, what's happening in Europe. Can we learn from the European Union arrangement and Brexit and all that so that we don't make the same mistakes? It's important to collaborate. It's important to interact with others. And for me, diversity is at the core. You have to have diverse teams. With diverse teams brings talent, creativity, and exciting projects that you probably would never think about yourself. So really value your teams, I think, and build skills as well. And just to conclude, thank you so much. Any questions, please do feel free to reach out to us. My contact details are here. We shared yesterday again. And thanks very much. Just on time.
Let's open up the floor. Are there any questions for Michelle? Yes, we've got one here in the front. Hi. There we go.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
I take it you've traveled a lot. I've seen you a lot online. You've engaged with a lot of regulators, government. Do you think globally the reason why we haven't had clear regulations around these digital assets could be the fear that if these assets were to catch mainstream, they might actually suffocate the opportunity for government-issued currencies.
So you mean in the context of digital currencies?
Yes.
Right. Okay. No, I think
Could they take over and...
Yeah. I think generally, I mean, if you take the Libra example, I think that really triggered, kind of, it was almost a little bit of a wake-up call for a lot of governments and I think central banks to say, actually, imagine a, sort of a central currency that we don't have. How do we influence monetary policy if you have this digital currency? So I think for governments, yes, there would definitely be a natural concern as to how do we handle, currencies that we don't have control over, right? How do we create, and with central bank digital currencies, remember, it's very different. It's not decentralized currency, not necessarily. I think it's more around trying to manage, foreign exchange challenges, and then really try and meet the requirements within a monetary policy framework, which is very, very important, I think, for governments. And of course, they're not necessarily going to ignore that. So it's almost kind of losing a little bit of control, but also how do you manage some of the challenges within the economy around Forex and a whole range of other issues. We do have some fintechs who are solving some of these challenges around Forex, for example, but it will be a natural concern, I think, for a lot of governments, and I've seen it across the world. But what I have also seen is a lot of governments investing quite a lot in looking at central bank digital currencies, when in my viewpoint, you don't necessarily, it depends on the country, and depends on the stage of development, it depends on a whole range of factors, before you should even start looking at, it might not even be a priority for the country right now. Maybe later on, you might look at digital currency. So I just always want governments and central banks be very careful on central bank digital currency, or being sold this idea to say you must have a central bank digital currency. Suitable in certain scenarios, but be very careful in terms of how you look at it.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.